Hey guys, Owen here with Seek Outside, and today I want to walk you through your initial burn-in and setup of a U-turn stove. For today's setup, we're going to be using the medium U-turn stove here. What you should have are two separate items. You're going to have your U-turn stove bag here, as well as a stovepipe storage tube. Opening up the bag here, you'll see that we have our medium U-turn top, medium U-turn front, some hardware, as well as the medium U-turn bottom. Moving on to our stovepipe storage tube here, we're going to have our damper slide, our spark arrestor, that also goes in the damper. We're gonna have our rolled up U-turn side, our stovepipe with associated stovepipe rings, our damper, and to end it all, our nut set. For now, we're gonna just go ahead and set our stovepipe to the side, as well as our damper and associated pieces. Now we're gonna go ahead and build the stove. In your kit, you should have 4 legs, and then you should have multiple wing nuts, as well as stove feet. For reference, this is a wing nut, and this will be a foot. Just go ahead and on all 4 legs, get 1 wing nut, a good couple inches up this stove leg. A good way to see when you have this wing nut at the correct height is simply just checking against the height of the U-turn side here. So as you can see, this is going to be a little bit too tall, so I'll just continue to screw this in, while this leg over here is just about right. You want to have a little bit of thread being able to go over the top of that U-turn side. Now that all 4 of our legs have the wing nuts a couple inches up the legs, we're gonna go ahead and start building this stove out. This is going to be your bottom. There's only gonna be 4 holes for the legs. This is going to be your front. It'll have a door as well as a sliding damper. And then this is going to be your top, which will have a hole for the damper and stovepipe. Go ahead and open up your U-turn side here, which is secured by some Velcro. And you'll notice that there are sections here in the front that are designed to connect to the front of the stove. And then there's also a few small slits, 1 on each side, and these are going to wrap around the bottom of your stove. Like I said, the U-turn can be a little bit unruly, mostly because it wants to roll back into its shape. Once you have it burned in, it's going to want to hold the shape of the stove more neatly. Go ahead and take your door and find these slotted sections down at the bottom of the U-turn side. You want these pointing down towards the intake damper here, which is going to be the bottom of the stove. Once you have that in the correct orientation, go ahead and simply just slide your door onto these U-turn sections here, and then do the same for the other side. Now that we have our sides on, it is now time to put the actual stove together here. So the bottom does not have a directional side, the top will, but what I like to do is just start out with the bottom, bend these little tabs out here on the U-turn side a little bit. This is going to help grab the bottom and secure the stove. So just go ahead and put your front in first and get that up to the front of the bottom. And then just go ahead and start to make sure these tabs are wrapped around the outside. Once those are wrapped around the outside, just go ahead and push the rest of the U-turn side into the bottom, and it should look something like that. Now the top is directional. You want the hole for the stovepipe and damper in the back of the stove. So that's going to be away from the door. This is a little bit easier to put on than the bottom is, just because there's no tabs. So I'll just go ahead, just like last time, put the front in, And then just go ahead and push the rest of the U-turn side into the top. It's now time to do the legs. So this is going to be, again, without the stove burned in, one of the more challenging parts in my opinion. What I like to do, sandwich the stove like this, go ahead and put it on its side. You're gonna start in the back, which I will flip around for you. And what you want to do is just go ahead and make sure these stoves are on these legs are on the outside. So thread it through the bottom first. Again, trying to sandwich that together. Go ahead and take a wing nut, thread it on backwards, just a few threads here. I'll do, once I get it on there, leave maybe 10 millimeters, and then I will just go ahead and thread it through the top, and go ahead and put another wing nut on top to secure that. I'm now going to come through this other side, and I'm going to push that through the top as well. Then just put a wing nut on top. And now your stove will be pretty stable. Again, this right before the first burn in, the U-turn is a little unruly, but certainly not the hardest thing to put together if you just take your time. There we go. And then we'll just move on to the back again and just go ahead and thread the last leg in through the front. There we go. Our stove is all set up. With the stove all built, you want to just make sure your tabs are on there on both sides. Now, what you want to do is just back off any of the nuts just a little bit so there's a little bit of room for them to move around. This is going to help during that burning process. So just back those off just a little bit. You don't want them super loose, but metal does expand as well as contract when it gets hot versus cold. So just leave those a little bit loose. Go ahead, put the stove on its side, and optional if you want to, I like to just thread your feet on here. A couple threads is all it needs, or you can just run it all the way down, whichever way you're feeling for the day. Now that your feet are on, go ahead and replace your door. Now it is time to go ahead and build the damper. For the damper, you're gonna have a damper tube, your rotating spark arrestor, and your damper slide. So to start out, you're gonna notice that there is a smaller hole as well as a bigger hole here on this damper itself. Go ahead and take your rotating spark arrestor and find the handle, and go ahead and thread that handle through the bigger hole on the damper and rotate that sideways like this. All you need to do now is just slightly compress the damper tube and stick the other end of the rod through, and now you have your spark arrestor inside of your damper. Go ahead for the sliding damper piece. You'll notice there's a slot here in your damper that just simply slides in. It's exposed so you can see how much you're dampening down your stove. So example, the further out it's going to be, the less dampening, the further in, the more dampened. Now that your U-turn stove is assembled and your damper is assembled, it's time to build the pipe. You can check out how to roll our titanium pipe right up here. All right, guys, it is now time to burn in our stove. I unfortunately do not have enough space to set up a shelter or my shelter at all. So what I'm gonna do is just burn it in using something to hold my stove. Right here, I have some wire up against a metal bar. So this is gonna hold my stovepipe while I burn in the stove. First thing I wanna do here is just go ahead and get my damper here in the stovepipe itself. You want it on the outside, you don't want it on the inside. The simple way to do this is just raise up your pipe rings a little bit. That's gonna help you get in there. And then next, you wanna go ahead and get your damper inserted into the stove, like so. And then I'll just go ahead and bring my pipe ring down. I've got my pipe ring down. Now it's time to start a fire in the stove. Again, the three things we wanna check for: make sure the nuts are not overly tight. We have our stovepipe on and our damper in, and we should be ready to start this fire. First thing I like to check, because we're trying to get the stove hot, we're trying to get the metal to take shape. What I want to do, make sure the dampener in the front, so the intake dampener is open, and then I want the top dampener wide open as well. You can go ahead and just remove the door if you'd like to start loading the stove. I'm gonna use some household items, like some newspaper and stuff, just because it's easier to get this guy started. All right, we can throw the door back on. I like to leave it just slightly cracked. That just allows a little bit more air in there for that fuel to really get going hot. And you can see our fire is starting to take off. See here, we're already starting to get some of that color down low near the damper. That's the color we're looking for. That means the titanium has gotten hot enough to start to change some shape. So you can see it's starting to develop on the pipe. We want to just get this guy rolling pretty good and see that difference in color change. A couple of good signs to look for. As you see, that U-turn side is changing color. The top has changed a ton of color, and that stovepipe is starting to change color. So that's all the titanium just taking its shape, getting nice and hot. As you're burning in your stove, familiarize yourself with some of the features, such as the intake and outtake damper. Go ahead and insert the damper and see how that affects the fire. Go ahead and close up the intake damper and see how that affects the fire. These are all things that are gonna really help when you're in the backcountry. A quick little hot tip is you'll probably notice that as you go up the pipe, it doesn't have that change of color. It is still remembering its shape. However, I do recommend, if you do have the time, just simply waiting for the stove and stovepipe to cool down, flipping the pipe to the other side and burning the other side of the pipe in. This is gonna give you the best success when you're out in the backcountry for rolling it real simple. As it sits right now, it's gonna be far easier to roll the pipe. The stove should also be set up quite a bit better and easier to do now that our U-turn side is burnt in and parts and pieces of our stove have now all conformed. The next time you set it up, you can definitely wrench down a little bit more on your stove legs and your hardware. Anyways, I appreciate you guys watching. If you guys have any other questions about burning in your stove, just drop them down in the comments or shoot us an email, info@seekoutside.com. Thank you guys for watching and have an amazing day.